Welcome, Ana Mari. Thank you so much for joining us on the Beyond Barriers podcast. We are thrilled to have you on. Tell us a little bit about who you are and your journey as you kind of progressed in your lifetime.
Thank you, Monica. I'm such a fan, so it's a great pleasure to be here with you. Um, my journey started young. I grew up, a Latina family. We were very nurtured. We lived really, in a little bubble because my
Uh-huh.
parents were immigrants, and so everyone was like huddled together, making making ends meet.
Mm-hmm.
But then I got a job right when I was 15, and I was a cashier at the pharmacy, the Omni Hotel in downtown Miami,
Okay.
and that was great. To learn. It was a young entrepreneurs who had this pharmacy. But then one day I got escorted by the police upstairs to the hotel. I couldn't go home. And the reason
Wow.
why I got escorted upstairs, and it wasn't just me, it was everybody who was working in this big tower at the Omni Hotel, was because Miami was on fire. You could actually look across the skyline and the
Mm-hmm.
whole city was on fire. I mean, it's a precedent to what we see now,
Mm-hmm.
um, with there were riots because of police brutality,
Mm-hmm.
and I realized in that moment the inequities. Right, it gave me a peek outside of my little bubble of where we were
Mm-hmm.
living in, in Southwest 8th Street, and
Mm-hmm.
and it was just shocking to me, the realization of how we didn't have very much in hindsight, but we had so much,
Mm-hmm.
but there were so many people that were um, were fighting for equity and
Mm-hmm.
for their rights and for the systems to be shifted. And so that really put fire in my belly to do the work that I am doing. I've always worked in either the nonprofit sector or in government,
Mm-hmm.
and philanthropy, always in places that are really about making this world a better place for all of us.
Wow, that's such a profound story. And it's, that moment where you found kind of, you said the fire in your belly, kind of your purpose. And once you understood that, how did you gain clarity on, the career path? Or how did you start saying, how did you figure out that you wanted to move forward in really focusing on that? And what were the next steps you did in order to start working in the nonprofits?
That was really hard because in my family, nobody had even gone to college, right?
Yes.
So it was
Uh-huh.
like, and then when I got myself into college on a full scholarship, I picked something really cryptic, international relations, and I kept going home, and my mom and my grandma would be like, "Pero what is that?" They could have understood like
Yes.
if I got a business degree or if I told them I'm going to be a lawyer or a doctor, but and I didn't know what it was either. I just sort of like picked something like just totally random that looked interesting because there was nobody to coach
Mm-hmm.
us back then. Now
Yes.
there's, the internet, so you can like sort of do self-tutorial. But back then it was just sort of like blindly piecing your way forward. And
Yes.
when I talk to folks, I say, have a direction, but don't have like this roadmap that is so uh, defined that you actually put blinders on yourself because you might miss some of like the opportunities that were never like would have
Yes.
you would never have imagined that they were part of your roadmap. I ended up working for the Clinton administration as an appointee. That
Wow.
was never in my roadmap. I wouldn't
Right.
have imagined that in a million years. I ended up working in philanthropy. I didn't know what philanthropy was, but these are opportunities that are put in front of you, and so you have to say, oh, let me try, let me test, and be
Yes.
open to that. So yeah, have a direction, but not like not a play by play with because um things happen and they happen for a purpose, and that's what really has been my story. um Very easily I could have still been
Mm-hmm.
a community organizer working, and this is a great, this is wonderful, I know amazing community organizers, but very easily I would have been there because I was perfectly happy,
Mm-hmm.
doing that kind of work. um but then I've been testing. I think part of what I like, and it's just my secret power, and we all
Mhm.
have
Yes.
superpowers, is, being a person that's about relationships and bridging agendas. And so what I've come to be doing is bridging like the nonprofit and the community with the advocacy, with the government, with the philanthropy, and putting all of those together. And believe me, they're all different languages, and so you
Mhm.
some of us that are bridge builders, in addition to others that are in that exact space. That I've never been in the corporate space. That's something that,
Mhm.
maybe I still have left to do, and that would be cool. But I think, yeah, just being open to opportunities. And we all have imposter syndrome, whether you're
Yes.
just starting in your career or you're ending it. I don't know any woman who doesn't have imposter syndrome. And so it's kind of scary when you like plop yourself into something that's brand new. But just fight against that imposter syndrome and just try it.
Yes.
Um,
That's such insightful feedback and advice, because what resonated with me is, as you mentioned, you went off to college, you were first generation college, and it resonated with me because I was in the same boat. And you pick a major because it sounded interesting, and in some cases because you have a limited frame of reference, right? And so you don't know what is out there. So what I love that you say is that, don't be so tied to what it is that because you don't know what you don't know. And I'll never forget when, I was going to school to be a doctor. I majored in biology, and then you get there and you realize there's so many other opportunities. And then, it's like, okay, well, maybe I need to try out some of these other things. And, just don't knock it till you try it. And maybe you will find that there's some alignment there. So, um, but,
Absolutely. I ended up doing international relations just because
uh-huh.
it looked interesting. But then when I graduated, I was like, really? Am I going to go work for the, CIA or something? It made no sense. Um,
Uh-huh.
I ended up then realizing, oh, there's just as much poverty in this country
Mhm.
and underserved communities in this country. I don't need to go abroad. I should be working domestically. And so I ended up working domestically, even though I went to school for international relations. It wasn't until like 30 years later when I went to work for the Ford Foundation that I found myself 30 years later
Uh-huh.
using that international relations degree that I had started off with. It eventually became useful, but who would have known?
Yeah. And it does come back sometimes full circle. And I think, what I like about your story is you graduated with this international relations degree, but at the end of the day, it doesn't define what it is that you're going to do. You leverage, kind of like you said, you identify your strengths and your skill sets and you move forward. Now, you mentioned you identified that your strengths were around relationship building and creating bridges and things like that, which is extremely important in terms of really being able to build lasting relationships and being able to leverage those relationships, kind of, for influential, um, you know, just to kind of help leverage and influence what it is that you're doing in your work. And that comes down to community and how important community and your network is. Can you share how you kind of gain access to influential leaders or build influential relationships? How do you go about establishing those?
I think hyper empathy would be
Mm,
something that you have to have,
yes.
because especially when you're trying to build these bridges, you have to be listening very carefully. You have to be asking a lot of questions before you act. And
Mm,
so that's very important. Trust is key.
mm,
If you have to be listening to those that are impacted and really understand, and you have to trust them and they have to be able to trust you. Without that, there is no relationships, and without relationships, you're not going to get very far, because you can be brilliant, working really hard, uh, doing really good work, but if no one's noticing, you're going to be very limited. So that's important. um, I think so. Relationships, trust, hyper empathy, listening, those are all important, I think, to be
mm,
able to be successful. I would add as an aside that you have to always also start with self-care.
Mm,
Because if you're not, and that I think has
yes.
really been an important lesson during this past year with the impacts of not just COVID, but the tension in our the world in which we're living with racial equity, and seeing after 30, 40
Hmm.
years how people are still being murdered in the streets,
Yes.
um, for just walking while black, right?
Right.
Uh, and the tension. I live in Washington, D.C., 2 miles from the Capitol. And
Hmm.
what happened on
Wow.
January 6th was just, you have to just breathe. and,
Yes.
and so those are all important components, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Now, wanting to switch gears a little bit, you talked some about um, in moving forward, you mentioned you worked for the Clinton administration, and you had this opportunity that you absolutely jumped on because it's an opportunity of a lifetime. But given that you were kind of first generation college, first generation kind of going off into some of these roles and jobs that you didn't really have a support system from a family perspective to kind of guide you and advise you and nurture you. How did you identify mentors and sponsors to to help guide you, or how did you kind of learn to navigate that path?
hmm Yeah, my family supported me in that they had so much love, and they
Yes.
said, you can do whatever you want. They expected me to be a secretary. And my grandfather took me to typing school, and I like flunked typing school on purpose because I was like, I'm not going to be a secretary. I ended up being a secretary of, because I also worked for President Obama, but I was a
Mhm.
deputy assistant secretary. So I wish my grandpa had gotten to see
Oh, that's
that. So that was fun. But how I identified, I really sought out women that were, that had worked really hard, and that understood the power of investing in other women.
mm,
So, and I couldn't have done it without them because they believed in me, and they would sit me down when they thought I was making mistakes
mhm.
and like not let me move. And even though there were a lot of tears, they would like confront what you're doing and pay attention and be careful. We don't want you to be a statistic, because I was a single mom, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm very, very lucky that uh, I was open to all of these women and open to the hard lessons of what they were offering me,
Yes.
and pushed through that. Because of them, I mean, I got a full scholarship to Harvard.
Wow.
And I went with my little 7-year-old, with Alexia, who actually came up on stage with me to graduate, because it was the two of
Oh,
us doing it together. So that was really sweet. But you have to find a network of women to support you, and that's women of like that are both your peers, but
mhm.
also women that have done that, and listen to them, because they have so many lessons. Even though the lessons might sound dated, they're not. There's a
Mm.
lot of that transcends. And I just that's very powerful.
That's beautiful. And you mentioned a little, getting the feedback, like you said, sometimes there are tears, but then internalizing that feedback, learning from it, and leveling up using that feedback. But at the same time, sometimes that feedback can leave you with kind of limiting beliefs or fears. What are some of the techniques you use throughout your life and even currently now to get past and overcome fears and limiting beliefs?
So you have to pay attention to what's in your heart, your mind, but also your body. How
Mm.
you sit, how you stand,
Uh-huh.
um, that has an impact in how you say things, and
Hmm.
how words come out, and how you're breathing. And so for me, it was very valuable when I learned the physicality of actually how I how I hold myself, and how that impacts your tone of voice,
Hmm.
and the cadence with which you speak, and paying attention to that has been that shifted a lot for
Hmm.
me. Understanding that even if I was terrified, if I stood up straight,
Mm-hmm.
Breathe slowly. I could say scary things, things that, talk back to a boss I was very excited about, and I felt more powerful automatically.
Yeah.
No one really teaches you that. You have to like learn it, and then it's like for me, it was a big aha. Maybe it's not such a big aha, but for me, learning how to use your body to feel
Yes.
less of an imposter and more of feel like you have more presence and more power was very important because um, I mean, I've worked in jobs that were very not just completely I anti-Latino, anti-immigrant, anti-women. I felt like anti-young. I just felt like everything was against me for a
Mhm.
while. And so you have to gather your strength and your power from other sources.
That's so important. And it's very true. I mean, research has shown, like, Amy Cuddy's research on the whole power pose and standing there for 2 minutes, like, Wonder Woman or something. And like you said, harnessing that power so that you can move forward and be powerful and say the things that you're scared to say. It's so important. And I love that you use that. It's a habit that you've kind of used to kind of bring yourself forward. And I think it's so important for our listeners to hear that you do have to embody these things, the physiology of like sitting up straight and powerful, and it kind of leading with that confidence is so important. Thank you for sharing that. Now, I wanted to pick your brain a little bit because you work with a lot of organizations and a lot of, you help develop a lot of leaders in the nonprofit sector and things like that. And one of the most important things, right, to be able to get ahead is for them to set goals for themselves or their organization, but then also execute on those goals. What are some tips you can share on, how people set goals and then actually execute on them? How do you actually execute and reach those goals?
Hmm. And that's when working with organizations.
Yeah.
Um, I'm married to a gorgeous Navajo man, and he taught me about thinking about 7 generations forward. And
Mm,
so you're thinking for the long term, you're thinking for the long term of your community.
hmm
And I think that's I think one of the anchors that I would think about. How will this impact in the short term, but also thinking in the long term.
hmm
Also, when we're working with communities, you have to think about what's tangible and
hmm
what's intangible. And often what's intangible is so much more important. I'm thinking about like civic engagement and
hmm
power building and movement building and the trust building, all of this work that we were talking about earlier. Um, where we tend to be visual
hmm
and we tend to be quantitative. And so I think you have to push for balance because the
hmm
balance between all of those is important, and always make sure that you're thinking about the whole picture.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, what I hear you say is that, I love that you said thinking 7 generations ahead, because that is the compelling future, right? That's that compelling future that motivates you to keep moving forward. And then really thinking about the, from a short term or even tangible, intangible of what are the things that you need to do right now, kind of focusing on the right thing at the right time to move those things forward is so
Mhm,
important.
mhm. Also
Um,
thinking about where is the power sitting, right?
yes.
And where should the power be sitting, and figuring out different systems were created by different people for different purposes, and so whatever space you're working in, you need to think about the power structure and
hmm That's
how
really,
to reimagine that.
yes, that's so important. And you mentioned a little bit about, you have an expertise in kind of like you said, moving kind of these movements and initiatives forward and really creating community and kind of pushing, those things, the agendas and kind of the movements. What are keys to being successful in kind of sharing that story? How do you formulate that story, and how do you, what's important about creating that brand or that story for that movement in order to move it forward?
Hmm. I'm not sure I know how to answer. I'm not sure I understand that question.
Yeah, so you were talking about, creating these movements and telling the story and then being able to convey that story to people to get them motivated and, inspired to kind of join the movement. And especially with a lot of the nonprofits that you work with, like how do they articulate or share that story in order for people to be compelled to move along with them?
I think what's happening more and more is that organizations, whether it's foundations, which I work with, or
Mhm.
donors, or even the government, there's more of an understanding that you have to listen to those that are most impacted.
Mm,
Those that are impacted already understand and have been
right.
waving the flag saying you need to listen to us, those that are, that understand and are living this day to day, and we know the solutions. Trust us.
Mhm.
Trust is key to do this collective problem solving. But for too many years, um, others that are sitting far away at a desk have felt like they have the answers. And so I think that to disrupt and to reimagine and to rebuild, we need to build a system that does listen to those
Mm,
with the lived experience. And so that shift is very important for me. It's key.
mhm.
And it's key to a lot of the solutions of the problems that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah.
And if we start with that at the core, um, I think you can then build, build, build.
That's so insightful because it is really listening to understand the pain points and what are the pain points so that, you can be the bridge to help, get to the solution.
Not only that, but what is rational? Um,
Mm,
I'm here sitting in, Washington, D.C. What's rational for me is very different than what is rational for someone who's living like in the colonias in McAllen, Texas, or
mhm,
what's rational for the person in McAllen, Texas is very different than what's happening up, if you're living in Seattle, it's
mhm,
just it's very, very different. And so we can only work from our lived experience, and we have to understand that just really varies. And so that's why that listening, if anything else, is come away with that of listening before you and asking before you act.
mhm. That's so that's fantastic. Now, shifting gears a little bit, you work for, you work and you kind of drive and lead the Hispanics in philanthropy. And I know that, many of our listeners and most of the people I know and myself, there's a passion for contribution. And, there is always that philanthropic bone in us that is always wanting to, give back. Talk a little bit about what you do with your organization and, how people can get involved and stay in the loop with what the type of work that you do.
Yeah, it's such fun work. I've been here 3 years now, and every day is new, and it's a great to be able to um, be leading this organization into the next generation. Um, Americans are very generous people. We're so giving.
Mm,
We give during good times, and when there's crisis, like now, we're even more and more generous. Latinos
mhm,
as well are very, very giving. We give in different ways,
mhm,
given that, our culture, we're much more relational in how we give. And
mhm,
so what we're trying to build is an organization that celebrates the generosity of our people, celebrates how we're givers, but also builds pipelines and pathways so that there's lots of ways of giving,
mhm,
right? So you can give through the United Way, which is fantastic. You can give through your community foundation, which is fantastic, but you can also give through crowdfunding. So, right, if you give $25 a year, you're a philanthropist, right? You're a
mm,
giver. There's a
mhm,
lot of power in being a philanthropist. So we have crowdfunding, we have digital giving circles, which are great because then you can give recurring. You can give more, right? right? You can give $2,500, and you can, like, there's things that are about impact investing, right? So it's,
Mhm.
which is, I think, what the wave of the future, which is a double bottom line. So you're giving a charitable contribution, but you're investing in entrepreneurs and Latinas
Mm.
businesses. There's Latinas are on fire. Right now, Latinas are the number one economic engine for our entrepreneurs.
Wow.
And they're doing this without any fairy dust, right? Imagine if we put a little bit of fairy dust,
Yes.
it's going to be amazing. That's why, I mean, look, administration after administration, the SBA, the head of the Small Business Administration, is pretty much always a Latina. That's
Mm.
for a reason, because our women are incredible entrepreneurs. And so we have something called the Power Up Fund, which is investing in Latina businesses.
Mhm.
We're really excited about that. We're really excited about Hip Give, which is our crowdfunding site, which is free. If you
Mhm.
do GoFundMe, they take 12% right off the top.
Wow.
Hip Give is completely free for our nonprofits. So we're excited about things like that, um, because what we want to do is make sure that there's ways to make it easy to give.
Yes.
Mhm.
That's fantastic. And I love that, all the work that you all are doing. But I think it's, phenomenal to see, like you said, the Latina entrepreneur, the Latinas are on fire, because it is so important to make sure that, they get a little bit more fairy dust to help them, move along. Because I've always believed, women hold up half the sky, right? And, but there's also a compounding effect when it's almost kind of like you touch, when you touch and you help a female entrepreneur, it's a multiplier effect because they help so many others, right? And it's like, be it their immediate family, extended family, and then like their extended circles of contact. So I think it's so important to invest in that because you are kind of, if there's that trickle down effect as well.
Absolutely.
So
Our
important.
Power Up Fund is working in Puerto Rico, in Miami, in El Paso, in Los Angeles, New York, and I think pretty soon we're going to be starting in Cleveland, Ohio, and after that, the whole entire country, I hope. And we're also actually working in Mexico, Central America,
Mhm.
Colombia. So really thinking about the hemisphere. That's another thing that we haven't talked about.
Mhm.
As Latinas,
Mhm.
uh, thinking about the whole entire hemisphere, the Caribbean, and the power
Mm.
of
Yes.
thinking across the hemisphere. If you were in France, you would be thinking about the whole EU, right? And the
Right.
power of a whole, so I think we need to be thinking about the power of our hemisphere. And that's exciting to think about that for the future as well.
That's fantastic. And, before we close, I do want to give you an opportunity because I know our listeners are going to, want to hear more from you or want to hear more about the work you do, or if there's ways that, others can get involved or contribute. What's the best way to, stay in contact with you or to just learn more about your organization?
Sure. So we are hiponline.org, hiponline.org, or you can follow us on social media, which is BeHip, um, BeHip Give.
Mhm.
You can also, anybody can come to our conference. You don't have to be Latina or Latino to come to our conference.
Mm, yes.
It's anybody who's interested in philanthropy, who's interested in the nonprofit sector. Our conference will be in September,
Hmm.
September 13th and 14th this year in Los Angeles. Knock on wood that we can have a conference socially distanced outdoors by then. We're very optimistic. But yeah, we work in um, coalitions. So
Hmm.
we work very closely with friends that are Native Americans in philanthropy, with the African American community, which is called APFI, which with APIP, which is um, Asian American. So it's a lot
Hmm.
about coalition building. We're working around education, around health, and really looking at all of the factors that are going into how we make this country a much better and always continuing to be better place to live for
That
everybody.
is fantastic. And thank you, on behalf of Beyond Barriers for all the work that you are doing in really helping accelerate success for all of these organizations that you invest in. And again, thank you for your time and sharing your story of success. I mean, it's inspirational to hear how, you went from this young Latina, not really understanding or knowing, international relations to turning into a leader, leading an organization that is helping so many people in this space of, contribution. So thank you so much
Oh,
for giving
Monica,
time.
thank you. I stand on the shoulders of everyone that came before me, and I'm here to help because you got to pay it forward, you got to pay it backwards and sideways. There's a lot of work
Yes.
to do. Great, but thank you for everything that you're doing to bring our women forward and to really support them. It's an honor to be here with you today.
Well, thank you.